Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in the book of Matthew, chapter 18, and we jumped into it last time, and with verse 1, where the disciples asked Jesus, um, who will be the greatest in the kingdom of God? Who would be the greatest? And this is not going to be the first time they asked this question. I'm going to get into Jesus' response. Um, I'm going to get into Jesus' response in that he basically tells them to become as children, but again, they're going to wrestle with this. They're going to wrestle with this question. I shouldn't say wrestle. They are. We talked about this last time. When they say kingdom, they mean literally the restoring of the kingdom of Israel that was prophesied, promised by God through prophecy. So let's jump into it. So I'll start again at Matthew chapter 18, verse 1 says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus and said, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?'" So again, we're going to revisit that later on. Um, and even up, as we saw in the scripture, all the way up to um, um, moments before Jesus ascends to heaven, they asked about restoring the kingdom. And even coming up, we're going to see where uh, James and John's mother is going to get in on this and try to get the jump on everybody else and basically say, uh, um, uh, you know, Jesus, put my boys on the one on your right side and the one on your left side. Of course, these are positions of power. Okay, these are positions of privilege and power in the kingdom. So, all right. So let's. So again, who was the greatest in the kingdom? Verse 2. He says, and he called a child to him and had him stand among them. So the answer is, he brings this child. So that's the answer. He brings this child and he says, "I assure you," he said, "unless you are converted and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So now he's going to go on and going to elaborate on his thought here. The attitude, the humility of children. "Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." A child depends on its father. A child in itself does not seek positions of power, greatness. Okay. Verse 5, it says, "And whoever welcomes one child like this in my name welcomes me. For whoever causes the downfall of one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for him if a heavy millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea." And this is a very stern warning. I'm going to say this for pastors, for ministers, ministries. Okay, this is one of to me a stern warning. If you cause the downfall of one who believes in Jesus. I think about all of the false prophets, the false teachers that are out there in their false teachings. And the devastation that they do, and the havoc they wreak in lives. Jesus says here, it would be better for them to hang a millstone around his neck. and they drown in the sea. Now, verse 7, woe to the world because of offenses, for offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offense come. Now, offense means stumbling block. Okay, that's what an offense is. We think of offenses as being insulted, being hurt and insulted. But the idea of offense, it means to cast a stumbling block before someone with the intent to make them stumble and fall. Okay? So he says these offenses will come. That's the reality. We shouldn't be surprised. Oh my God, how could this happen? How could you do this to me? They're going to come. But then he also says, woe to that man by whom the offense come. Verse 8. If your hand or foot causes your downfall, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes your downfall, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter in life with 1 eye rather to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into hell fire. Now, I've yet to see anyone try to say that this is kind of a literal statement, not a figurative statement that Jesus is making here. Yeah, I've never seen anybody gorge their eye out or cut their hand. Now, the sad thing is, probably somewhere there is some Looney Tune person, a crazy person, that would take this to heart. And when I say Looney Tune, I'm not just talking about that they're mentally disturbed, but spiritually, you could say spiritually, mentally disturbed. And that's amazing. Okay. But I think we get the case. In other words, whatever is causing you to sin, cut it out of your life. Cut it out of your life. There are a group of people, mostly, let's say, and you could say the backwoods of Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky. I think you can find some in Indiana that believe that Mark 16 literally, and they call them snake handling churches, or for some deluded reason that when they read Mark 16, that their interpretation was when they have a church service, let's gather some rattlesnakes or poisonous vipers and let's get a jar of cyanide and let's just, drink this. And this is a testament. This is what they're supposed to do. So when I say that there are crazies out there, they're, spiritually, because these people they're not mentally, unstable in that respect. They're mentally deluded because when you could read something like that and then your takeaway is, let's go find a snake and let it bite me, or let's get some cyanide and drink. And the most amazing thing about these backwards people is they miss Mark's gospel by going out and preaching the gospel. You rather sit up in your church service and handle rattlesnakes, letting them bite you, and drinking cyanide, than going out what he actually told you to do in that context of Mark 16 was to go out and preach the gospel. All right. Verse 10, see that you don't look down on one of these little ones, because I tell you that in heaven their angels continually view the face of my Father in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save the lost. Now, again, you see this phrase in verse 11 that's in brackets, signifying that in the original manuscripts, and I kind of got into when we talk about manuscript, when we have to tackle this kind of issue here, that this phrase why, if it's not in the original manuscripts, then why is it in any of the translations? Okay, so the reason, okay, let me see how many translations this is in here. But one, I'm going to say that I think it's kind of inaccurate to say the original Greek, because we have to understand that for example, Matthew, when he wrote his book here, he wrote it in the Greek language. Now, the original writings, okay, were written, what they call ink, what we call ink, they could have been something like soot, moisture out soot, but not ink as we think about it. And then the plants, the papyri plants, were dried out plants that they would write on these, write the letter. And in some cases, they would dictate them, and then somebody, a scribe, would write them. Okay. Now, as a result, the plants were very flimsy. I don't believe, I don't even know if we have any of the surviving plants. Very few. What we have is copies upon copies upon copies. They were very free to make copies of the letter. In fact, the New Testament, out of any writing of antiquity, has more copies than any other writing of antiquity. When people say that the scriptures were tampered with, they say, well, the Bible was tampered with. Well, challenge them on that and say, how? They say, well, so things were put in. Well, what was put in? So when we look at this, so the phrase, the Son of Man has come. Well, how do we then explain a phrase that is not found in manuscript? Well, one, we have to understand the term manuscript. So the manuscripts were the copies of the copies. To date, we have some over 5,000 original copies. And then you have some 25,000 copies of copies, and some of those copies are fragments, entire letters, fragments, things like that. So when you have that many copies and you put them together, you can compare one with the other. And then you have different manuscripts. So over time, you have different sets of manuscripts in one way, the other that was discovered. So for example, you may hear about the Dead Sea Scrolls that was discovered, I believe, back in the 40s. And when they discovered these Dead Sea Scrolls and start comparing the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found that some of the writings, for example, in Isaiah, was almost identical. So my point is that when you look at it from an archaeological standpoint, then you see these discoveries, and what you have is, over the centuries, these copies of copies have been preserved. Okay. So that's why when they have the brackets, depending on the set of manuscript, so they say in this set of manuscript, this phrase is not found, and then in this set, the phrase is found. Okay. Now, why does it happen? Because remember, we go back, is that they copied everything, much like, I'm dating myself. I remember in the 80s that, we would make copies of cassette tapes. Okay. And you, of course, our method of recording and taping was more, was better. But again, they would just literally copy, right? Just kind of copy. Hey, look, the book of Matthew. People now start copying, right? Scribes copy. So sometimes you would have these particular phrases that found their way in the manuscripts. But this is also why we also have the scholarly work that's done, that was able to say, hey, we have a question mark here about, for the Son of Man has come and saved the lost. Another interesting about the phrase, remember, Jesus had already made this statement. Just like when we just look back here, this phrase here, when Jesus said, if your hand or your foot call this your downfall. Well, remember, he said this where? In Matthew chapter 5, if you remember. Okay. So again, that's just some kind of when you see these brackets in some of the translations, like I don't think it's in the New King James, but I think it's in the notes. If you have the notes of the New King James, yeah. So in the New King James, so let me see. I'm just looking at some other translation, and I think it's important for us to know, to kind of know this. Um, I think it's important we understand it, because to more like today, we have the Bible that is being attacked. We have the oh, I'm sorry, I'm on a different. I would have to look at my translation here. I mean here, because I don't even have it marked in here. My Bible app here is what I'm looking at. All right, but all right. Anyway, we when you see this, let me try one other thing here. Okay. Let me see if it's let's look at the AV. They don't have theirs marked here. So one of the ways you would have to, American Standard Translation, one of the ways you would have to know this is, see right here, okay, in this translation they have the brackets. All right, I just wanted to, I think there's more translations that have their brackets. And then of course, if you have a study Bible, you would have, you would see the notes that they would tell you. Okay, so he says, see that you don't look down on one of these little ones, because I tell you that in heaven, their angels continually view the face of my Father in heaven. Now that's an interesting kind of story there. I mean, revelation. Their angels can view the face of my Father. So here's the thing: what exactly does that mean? And then what would be the result of that? You have to kind of know that it's not a good thing if you're mistreating one of the ones that believe in the Father. And notice he says here, they're angels. Now, I don't want to get too far off into that, because we don't have a lot of detail. One of the things I don't do is I don't like to try to ad lib, add or speculate. Here we can say, their angels continually view the face of my Father. So we can then conclude people have angels. We have angels. What exactly does the angel do? We don't have exactly that detail. Because here's my point. If you could say, well, the angel saved me, but then in other times he doesn't save you, right? So again, exactly what does this mean? Just not clear. Verse 11, for the Son of Man has come to save the lost. That is God's prime directive. You could say he's come to save the lost. I will say this, the fact that he says that he come to save the lost, this is prime directive. And as I said, you see Jesus saying this in other places, that he has come to save. And I think about different denominations. When you want to understand God's heart, when you want to understand, what's the cross about? Why did Jesus come? And then you compare that by different denominational teachings. Start with his motive. He came to save the lost. So the question is, did he do that? Now, of course, your answer can vary based upon what denomination. For example, you look at Calvinism or Reformed theology or predestination. In the nutshell, they say that God has predetermined some to be saved, and he's also predetermined others, or the rest, to be lost. In other words, they have no hope. If you're not chosen, you are eternally damned. Now, if you are chosen, hip hip hooray for you. But doesn't that fly in the face? The Thunderman came to save the lost. Not some, but the lost. That's what he came for. If you have doubts and say, well, man, can I ever measure up to God's perfection? Jesus came to save the lost. We can answer that a lot of ways. Verse 12, what do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, won't he leave the 99 on the hillside and go and search for the stray? And if he finds it, I assure you, he rejoiced over that sheep more than over the 99 that did not go astray. In the same way, it is not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones perish. Now, remember, he had a child around him when he said that. And now he kind of clarified one of these little ones that what? That believe in him. It's not God's will. Why? Because he came to save. That's why he came to save. Now, I also say this is that sadly, a lot of churches don't have the kind of heart that Jesus has for his people. We should. Notice what he says right here. If someone goes astray, the shepherd will leave the 91. Now, let's be clear. He's not leaving the 99 unattended, so that other packs of wolves can attack the sheep. But the one thing that the imagery that you see right here is that God came. When one of the sheep goes astray, he goes after the sheep and finds him. So many times in churches, you could leave the church and they will ostracize you. They will cut you off. You will never hear from them. You will never, they'll act like you don't exist. That's not the heart of God. Now, that's not to say that every time you reach out to somebody that you're going to get a positive response. But you should reach out. You should not treat them. In other words, their leaving should be the kind of what's going on in their heart and not yours. And one of the sad things is that you can leave a church. I know you can leave a church and they will never know if you're even gone. And so that's interesting. Okay, we're going to pick it up next time, guys, because we're going to talking about forgiveness. And so I'll spend my time on that because stay tuned for that one. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Also, don't forget to subscribe to The Bible Plain and Simple. Okay, I'll see you in the next study.